You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and it is officially time. And it's been a little bit, almost about maybe honestly, it might even be technically more than a week since we've last spoke. Been a little bit busy, but we have to make a pick for the final game of the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 59, the Chiefs taking on the Eagles. So much on the line here. History already being made and potentially going to be made even further depending on the outcome of this game. There is so much to get into, so much to discuss. But before we do, because I'm going to tease this is something I'm going to do a little bit later in the week, but I want to open up the question to you all first. There's been a couple of big announcements over the last day. Basically, Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland. That is a massive name to be requesting a trade out from where he is. He is a impact playmaking pass rusher, edge setter. He can do it all as a guy on that defensive line in Cleveland. It sounds like the Browns aren't willing to trade him unless the haul is massive, but he wants out. And then on top of that, later in the evening last night, we also got Cooper Kupp announcing that the Rams are looking to move him immediately. So there are two massive names potentially going on the trade block here. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is a sure thing. And then Myles Garrett, if the price is right, could potentially get moved as well. I want to hear from you all. Where are their best landing spots? What places make the most sense to you? Fire away in the comments section. Like I said, this will be something that I plan on discussing a little bit later in the week. I want to dive in, do a little bit of research, and bring some teams to light that I think would make the most sense rather than just rattling off team names for the sake of doing so. But I want to hear from you all. Fire away in that comment section. But aside from that, Super Bowl 59, it's here. It'll be here soon. It's a little bit under a week away. The Chiefs taking on Philadelphia in New Orleans. The Chiefs come into this game 23-1 in their last 24 football games in which they were actively trying to win those football games. I'm not counting the loss to the Broncos because they opted, I guess you should say, to lose that football game. They had no desire to win there. But in games in which they are trying, of their last 24, they are literally 23-1 with their lone loss being to the Buffalo Bills this past season. Three-peat is, of course, on the line as well. Kansas City already making history as the first three-peat attempting team to make the Super Bowl. Now they are looking to finalize that history and stamp it with the win and go 3 straight wins. We're going to talk about this game. We're even going to talk some of the penalty stuff as well, because it's something that I will honestly say I do somewhat, not largely ignore, but just something I don't like to heavily get into. I don't like getting away from the actual football as well, but it is something that is being so heavily talked about. I decided to at least run some numbers to present to you all, just to add a little bit of discussion, I guess, to that piece of the football game, because at this point it's kind of taken on a life of its own. But the actual football matters at hand. First thing I'm looking at is, of course, and I think it's very obvious here, if you're not asking this question, you're not taking this game seriously. Can the Chiefs slow down Saquon Barkley? At this point, you can't ask if the Chiefs can stop him, because I don't really think anyone defensively has been able to do so this season in any meaningful type of way. Slowing Saquon down is more likely than anything else. Outright stopping him just does not seem like it's in the cards. Between his skill set and the offensive line that they have in Philadelphia, I don't really think you're stopping him, but slowing him down is a possibility, especially for a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Saquon Barkley this season, playoffs included, averaging just about 129 yards per game. He's got 18 total rushing touchdowns, averaging about 6 yards per attempt. Obviously, he crossed that 2,000-yard mark in 16 games, not having to play in that 17th game. The Chiefs' run defense is going to have their hands full in this matchup here. You're looking at guys like Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, Mike Danoff on the defensive line, and then that linebacking group that in my eyes is one of the deepest in football. Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, Leo Chenal. You got a really stable group of guys over there that you can count on no matter who is on the football field to make a play, because we have seen all of those guys be impact playmakers for that defense. Now, the Chiefs' run defense finished the regular season averaging about 102 yards per game allowed. It actually put them at 8th best in the NFL, and they were averaging about 4.1 yards per attempt, which put them in the top 5 of the NFL, tied for 4th best in the league. Now, that all being said, and we're going to exclude the Broncos game because obviously they were not trying to win that game, and I don't really think it's important to include the statistics of that game in this here. We will look at their last 3 games played. That is between the game against Buffalo that they just had most recently, the game against Houston in the divisional round, and then their final actual regular season game that they were trying to win, and that was against Pittsburgh. Looking at those 3 games, the run defense did not look good. 166 yards allowed per game. That would put them near one of the worst teams in the NFL just on an average basis alone. Not a great number to be sitting at. And when you look at just the way everyone's kind of expecting Saquon to perform in the Super Bowl, the general consensus is that Saquon is going to have a day. And I always stress this here. I am not a betting channel by any means. None of the predictions I make have anything to do with gambling in any shape or form. However, for this game, I was a little bit curious what the over-under was going to be set at for Saquon Barkley. What do the books think is realistic? Just because I'm curious to see what they thought. Having it set at 110.5 yards is pretty interesting to me, because when you look at that number, and this is like average across books, mind you. This is just me going through different books, seeing what they were all saying, and the average is hanging around that 110.5 mark. Barkley has crossed that number 11 times out of the 19 games that he's played in this season. And I'll be honest, if I'm being realistic with the way that Saquon has played this year, if he doesn't cross 110, 15, maybe even 120 yards in this game where everything matters the absolute most, to the point where he was even limited a bit during the NFC Championship game because he definitely tweaked something in his calf off that initial score on the very first play against the Commanders. The fact that he was even limited in terms of how, because let's be honest, there were certain points right after that play happened where it felt like we weren't seeing Barkley as often. The broadcast was even hyper-fixated on it. It was something that was talked about for a large majority of the game. He still had a great game, don't get me wrong. Nearly 120 yards in the performance. But it was clear that with the amount of snaps he got in that game, and obviously things got crazy, they ran away with the game fairly early on too, he was limited because he was saving himself for this game here. I would be shocked if Saquon is not pushing near 25 carries in this game. You lean on what has gotten you to this point in the season. You challenge a run defense that finished the season top 10. However, when you look at the back half of the season, the performance started to taper off a bit. And what we've seen from them in their last 3 actual games of action, the Chiefs' run defense has softened up a little bit. I think that the Eagles are going to challenge this group here, but it is something to keep an eye on in this game. I am not going to be surprised if Saquon Barkley's pushing north of 120 yards in this game. If you're the Eagles and you're being smart about what got you here to this big game, you're not trying to be cute. You're not trying to play around what got you there. You are going to do what got you there, and that is absolutely pound the rock with the massive free agent signing you had in Saquon Barkley this past offseason, the 2,000-yard rusher you have here. But all eyes are on that Chiefs run defense and if they can slow him down. On the flip side of things, defensively for the Eagles, I'm looking specifically at their defensive line and their ability to disrupt and make Patrick Mahomes uncomfortable. The Chiefs' first offensive turnover since Week 11 happened against, surprise, the Bills last week, who the last time they turned the ball over was also the Bills as well. It's no surprise that some of the worst games we've seen from Patrick Mahomes this season were when he was under pretty heavy amounts of pressure this year. Typically, when he was getting pressured at about 33% of his dropbacks, so about 1/3, 1 in every 3 dropbacks he makes, things got a little bit dicey. We were either seeing low completion percentages from his end or he was throwing interceptions in games. There was a couple of anomalies like the Falcons and Bengals games where he didn't get pressured a lot, but he still had not so great performances. But for the most part, when the pressure was on in certain games, especially earlier in the year, more so than anything else, you got less than stellar performances from Patrick Mahomes. They still wound up only losing one game while trying, but the point is to be made that there are weaknesses that you can exploit with Patrick Mahomes, but you've got to be aggressive and make him uncomfortable. This is where I look at guys like Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith Jr., Jalen Carter, a group of guys that combined together have 19 total sacks and 110 pressures on the season. The Eagles ranked as the 7th best team in terms of time to pressure this year, averaging about 2.6 seconds when getting close to the quarterback and creating that pressure. And when you look at Patrick Mahomes' time to throw average this season, sitting at about 2.81, there is a real possibility that we see some of that pressure get brought on. Maybe Patrick Mahomes gets forced into a mistake or two in this game. It's a lot to ask for. Again, they have one turnover in Kansas City since week 11, and that was against the Bills. And then the next time they had another turnover, it was against very much the same team, the Buffalo Bills, last week in the AFC Championship game. But getting after Patrick Mahomes and disrupting the rhythm that he can find himself in, that we have seen from him, especially in the later portion of the season, like a lot of the problems that he dealt with early in the year, offense was banged up. There was no Isaiah Pacheco. They hadn't acquired DeAndre Hopkins yet. You lost Marquise Brown before the season even started. Rashee Rice went down early in the year. But as this team has gotten each guy back, or when they made the move for DeAndre Hopkins, it's felt like the offense has kind of leveled itself out. Xavier Worthy has really rounded out into just an overall offensive weapon for the team, where he's not just a guy stretching the defense, but he's a part of like these gadget trick plays, and he can make a number of things happen. And some of those early season mistakes we were seeing from him, like concentration type errors, have gone away. This is a Chiefs team that if you let Patrick Mahomes just sit back and dial it up, he will kill you on defense. You have to be aggressive. Those guys up front, those first round selections, those top tier players that you have been throwing those high end picks at over the last few years in the draft have got to come through in this game for Philadelphia. The last thing that I'm looking at, and it's a pretty simple thing, but it is definitely one that in my eyes is worth bringing up because I ran the numbers on this one here, because both teams are excellent at ball protection. The Chiefs finishing the season with just 14 offensive turnovers. The Eagles themselves only one more turnover with 15 on the year. Both of these teams overall have had a pretty solid season of ball protection. Now, the Chiefs, first half of the season, far uglier than the back half of the season, but cleaning that up, I feel like what we saw in the second half of the year is probably more what they actually are as a team, whereas the Eagles, they just had random games where things were just really not going well for them, and mistake after mistake kind of kept happening, where they had 6 different games with 2 turnovers or more. But if it wasn't one of those games, I think it was 6 games with 2 turnovers in one singular game that they only had 1 turnover. And then everything else, they just didn't turn the ball over. So if they're not making mistakes, they're typically not turning the football over. And usually it's those games where Saquon Barkley's just getting the ball. He's grounding and pounding his, opposing defenses in a submission, and he's doing his thing. So ball protection is key here. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because obviously you don't want to turn the football over. Typically, the team that turns the football over less wins. And in the Super Bowl's history, from all 58 matchups that we've seen so far, teams that have won the turnover battle are sitting at a whopping 38-8, unsurprisingly, all time. Now, obviously, that doesn't equate to 58 total games played. There have been a handful of Super Bowls where teams have tied as far as turnovers are concerned. But when there was a definitive winner in the category, 38-8 all time. Now, that number has actually skewed a little bit more recently than anything else. The further back you go, the more clear it is that the team that had fewer turnovers is the winner. But when you look at the more recent Super Bowls, there have been some teams that have turned the football over less that have lost the game, that have lost the game. So it's not something that is, I would say, the most important thing in the world, but it is definitely crucial to winning a game like this where everything is on the line. You can't be giving opponents extra possessions. And when you look at the two teams and the way they match up right now, you have the Philadelphia Eagles in a run game that only gets better as the game wears on. Jalen Hurts, A lot of people have given him a lot of flack for not putting up monster numbers this season, but it feels like the people that are saying that are just completely whiffing over the fact that it's because Saquon Barkley had a 2,000-yard rushing season and he didn't need to have a monster year. And then on Patrick Mahomes' end, yeah, the early portion of the season was not great, but he has been pretty much nails since that Week 11 game against the Bills, and that point on has looked phenomenal as the offense has not made mistakes except for one literal turnover. Both of these teams, the way I see it, could cost themselves a championship if they wind up giving the other team an extra possession, because I look at both of these teams as teams you do not want to be giving extra opportunities to score, because Patrick Mahomes' history when getting the football, especially when they're down, looking to tie the game or take the lead, he has like a 70-something% conversion rate, so you know that he will kill you if the opportunity is there, especially if he's behind. And this is an Eagles team that if you are giving this offense any sort of extra life than it already has, where it just dumped 50-some-odd points against the NFC Championship opponent last week, they're both just offenses you can't afford to be giving extra opportunities to. Now, to step away from the game just slightly, I said we were going to talk about penalties and this whole conversation surrounding the Chiefs. Now, I am not one to buy into the conspiracy that the NFL wants certain teams to win because it's good for them and blah, 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 blah. You can say what you want about Taylor Swift. It's just where I stand. I'm not one of those people that believes in it. I'm sorry if that upsets you. But it's fun to talk about this stuff, and I like to joke around about it. But I was curious just about the numbers overall, specifically with this three-peat that's going on with Kansas City right now. And I wanted to take a look at all of the penalties that were accepted by both the Chiefs and by their opponents over the duration of this 3-year span that we have gone on now, as the Chiefs look to finalize their history-making run here with one final Super Bowl victory to cap off the three-peat. Now, when you look at regular season numbers, the Chiefs, in this 3-year span, have had 288 penalties accepted against them in the duration of this 3 years. If you want to add in the playoff number, that number jumps up to 324. Their opponents during the regular season sitting at 278 penalties accepted against them. That is actually 10 less than what the Chiefs have had accepted against them. Now, mind you, this is accepted penalties, not penalties thrown, just because that's a number that it took me a while to put this together. Never mind going and trying to figure out what penalties were and were not accepted. I just don't have all the time in the world to be putting all those numbers together. If you know and you've looked it up yourself, throw it in the comment section, because I would be curious, just penalties thrown overall. If you know a place to get that number, please also tell me where you got it, because I'd be curious to look at it. But with the playoffs included, 332 penalties altogether. So that actually does jump over the Chiefs, who, again, we're sitting at 324 if you include the playoff numbers. So the regular season, the Chiefs have actually had more penalties called against them than their opponents. But when you look at just the playoffs alone, you have 36 accepted penalties against the Chiefs to the 54 penalties of their opponents that have been accepted by the Chiefs themselves during these playoff games that they've played. So there is definitely something to be said about a number that is not quite double, but approaching the boundary of like near twice as many penalties accepted against their opponents when you look at the playoff picture of the Chiefs. But actually, I was pretty surprised when I looked at the numbers and I drew them all out that the Chiefs have actually had more penalties called against them just in the regular season outright, for just how loud this conversation has been about penalties. And now, of course, the discussion is there to have about the timing of the penalties, when they're called. And of course, with the playoff differential there, I can see where maybe some people are coming from with that conversation. Again, 54 penalties to the 36 against the Chiefs there's a little bit of a disparity there. It's nearly 20 penalty differential, but overall, it was just interesting to kind of put out the numbers, especially when we're talking this three-peat that's going on specifically, and how the conversation has just been that the NFL is rigging this three-peat to happen because they wanted to have it happen so bad. And the Taylor Swift piece to the or element to the entire piece of the pie we're dealing with right now, I was just kind of curious. So do with those numbers what you will. I just wanted to present them to you all in case you were actually wondering what those raw numbers are. But Chiefs have had more penalties accepted against them during the regular season season. Their opponents have had more accepted against them in the playoffs, where you could argue things matter a little bit more. But overall, there's only in total, if you include with the playoff numbers, Chiefs 324, their opponents 332. That is literally just a 8 penalty differential over the course of nearly 3 years of football games played. That's just about 50-50. I mean, we're a slightly off. It's like maybe a 51% lean to the Chiefs, if anything. So it's not that wide of a gap. You could talk about the playoffs. Again, things matter a little bit more there. But overall, just looking at the numbers from 1,000 feet, it's pretty 50-50. Now, we've talked penalties, we've talked a football game, we've talked about the history that can be made here with this matchup here. We're all wondering, though, Ethan, at this point, you've been rambling for a while now, who the hell do you think is going to win this football game? And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm 20 minutes into this conversation with you all, or closing in on it, and I genuinely have no idea. I have been stumped about this, and I have been thinking hard about this the last few days. I honestly wanted to put out just an episode of the show a couple of days ago, or 2-3 days ago, just because I wanted to have something go up between the recap of the championship games and then this prediction here. But I've just been so stumped on trying to go with who I wanted to win this game and how I wanted to kind of angle this discussion. And I'm at a loss because there is so much history riding on the Chiefs right now, and that pressure has been there for years now at this point, but they just keep coming through. And I have adopted the mentality of, I don't know if I can pick against the Chiefs when things matter the most like this. But then you have a team like the Philadelphia Eagles who, if you followed my power rankings this season, I have considered them the best team in the NFL for quite some time now. I ranked them number one even after they lost that game to the Commanders, and I got so much crap for it from a lot of people. Eagles fans were even telling me that they weren't too sure they could consider themselves the best team in the NFL. I have literal comments of people saying that to me as Eagles fans, but I was willing to die on the hill. I look at Philadelphia as the deepest roster in the NFL. I would give the Chiefs, though, with their legacy that they have built to this point here, the coaching staff, I would obviously give the edge to as well. And I don't think the Chiefs roster as a whole is that much farther behind than the Philadelphia Eagles are. I just think that if I was to build a roster to be as well-rounded as possible, it would probably look more so like Philadelphia's roster than it would Kansas City's. So that's where my edge does lie there. But I do think just as a full team, Philadelphia has got it all. And I literally, in my notes here, I don't even have a winner. I don't even have a final score written out. So as I am saying this to you all right now, I'm basically finding out who I'm going to go with because I was never really sure of it up until this point. And I'm still not even positive. And that's why I always tell everyone, I'm not a betting channel. I'm just going to my gut feeling more often than not and hoping for the best. And my gut feeling has gotten me to 193-91 this season, and I'm happy with that. So with all that being said, to cap off the 2024 season and Super Bowl 59, the team I'm going to go with for the W here, after much consideration, I think I'm going to settle on the Kansas City Chiefs and the three-peat. I want the Eagles to win this game so bad because Saquon Barkley and just the opportunity to get one over. And I took the Philadelphia Eagles to beat the Chiefs the first time these two teams met in the Super Bowl. Basically what started this three-peat dynasty run here that we have going on from Kansas City. And I feel like the NFL did that Eagles team such a disservice with what they did to that football field and just how poor that field condition was, because the Eagles had a phenomenal defense that year and it was obliterated in any shape or form of being able to do anything in that game, and we got the wild high-scoring affair that we did. I really am unhappy with how that played out in that game here, and now looking at the way things are at this point, clearly something special was just starting with Kansas City. I'm not going to say that the field conditions cost the Eagles that football game because the Chiefs defense did have to play on that same field as well. I just feel like defense was kind of blown out of the equation in that game, and a fumble by Jalen Hurts is basically the one difference maker you have in that game because both teams played perfect beside that offensively. But what the Chiefs have brewing right now with Andy Reid, with Patrick Mahomes, and just the offense, the defense, and how good that defense is and what they have put together, and the Chiefs getting healthy at the right time, this Eagles team is built to snap the streak I firmly believe that, but something in my heart of hearts just cannot move away from the Chiefs pulling off the win in this game here. So I am going to take the Chiefs to win. I have them winning an absolute slugfest, but I think the Chiefs can get the job done 30-28. I'm thinking like game-winning field goal, something like that, because when Patrick Mahomes gets in that situation, when it matters most, as I mentioned earlier, there is that stat that's out there where when Patrick Mahomes is behind and he has the football and he has the opportunity to score and tie the game or take the lead, his conversion rate on that is like 70-something% at this point. I don't know what the exact number is. I wish I wrote that down, but I didn't. But it's hanging around a 70% hit rate. He gets the job done when it matters most. And again, I don't buy into the officiating nonsense. It's just sometimes, teams get good whistles. I look back at the Patriots dynasty, having grown up in New England. It is something I watched myself there. The whistles just tend to go your way when you are the best team in the NFL. You get benefits of the doubt and things like that. Whatever that may be, that's a conversation for another day. But just from a pure football standpoint, as I said, I trust the roster that they have built in Philadelphia as arguably the best in the NFL. I don't think the Chiefs are very far behind them. Very, very slim differential between the two, but I will take quarterback head-to-head. I will take coaching head-to-head on Kansas City's end, and I'm going to take the legacy that they've built. Eagles fans, I'm sorry if that disappoints you. I am rooting for the Eagles to win this game, but I expect the Chiefs to get the job done. And again, 30-28. I think we're going to get a good football game between these two teams here, but I do think the Chiefs are going to have to find a way to put up at least another 30 points to come out with a win here with the way this Eagles offense has been rocking and rolling this year. So give me the Chiefs. Big W here to cap off the season. And I also selfishly do kind of want to see, even though I am rooting for the Eagles in this game, I do selfishly want to see history made. Just as like a football fan, I want to see a three-peat happen in my lifetime, to say that because odds are this doesn't happen again. I know we just saw the Patriots have a pretty crazy dynastic run and now the Chiefs are doing this, but the likelihood that this happens again is not really there. So I would selfishly, as a football fan, just want to see the three-peat happen before I die. So, and I'm young, I got time, but I just want to see it happen. So those are my thoughts. That's what my breakdown of the game. Let me know in the comment section, who do you think's going to win? Who's coming out on top and why? What are you looking at in this game here? What's going to matter the most in your eyes and determine this football game? And going back to the question from earlier, Myles Garrett, Cooper Kupp, potentially on the move. Cooper Kupp's definitely on the move. Myles Garrett, potentially. Where do those guys fit best? What teams do you want to see or expect to see go after those two veteran players? Because I think they would be crucial additions to contending teams, or maybe even teams that are on the come up or looking to kind of retool themselves and could use a veteran presence like one of those two guys on the roster. So let me hear from you all. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.